Well, hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to session 38 of our verse-by-verse study through the book of Genesis in the virtual life Bible study here at City on a Hill. My name is Pastor Derrick. Welcome back for another round of fun. We are getting closer and closer to the end of this great study through the book of Genesis, and it's been such a wild ride, has it not? We began this study, I think well over a year ago now, and of course, it was put on hold for about 6 months during COVID when we were sheltering in place. We did our COVID-19 sort of special edition devotional study that lasted about 8 weeks. We had, I think, 13 weeks of 11 or 13, I don't remember now, of the book of Colossians. We studied verse by verse through the entire book of Colossians, and then after growing tired and weary of waiting, we decided to go ahead and come back, even though we hadn't been meeting yet, and jump back into Genesis. We are, for the first time this week, opening up our Bible studies back to the meeting in person standards. And some of our groups are going to take a couple weeks before they get moved back in. They want to have time to really make sure that everybody's on board. Certainly, we're not pressuring groups to do that. If you still feel not quite safe yet to come back, then we're going to make some arrangements for even our in-person classes to be sort of a hybrid approach where you will still be able to zoom in and be a part of that group discussion, even though some of the class is meeting together on Sunday morning. We're doing this because we've gotten rid of registrations now. We felt like registrations kind of presented an extra layer of complications for our Bible study ministry, and now with those gone, I wanted to go ahead and just open the door up and say, hey, when you're ready, I'd like to start moving in that direction. I don't want to push anyone, I don't want to rush anyone, but I do want to get the ball rolling because we want to get, schools are going back, my kids are going back in person. There are still some guidelines in place, as there are here on Sunday mornings, with temperature checks and masks, good social distancing within the classroom, a safe distance from one another, but we're really looking forward to wrapping this thing up in person. And then you are about to hear it here first. We are going to jump into the book of Amos. It's a minor prophet study. Don't anticipate it will be a really lengthy study, although it is 9 chapters long, 9 chapters long. Can't remember off the top of my head. I've begun outlining it. But it is really great. There's a lot of really great lessons that I think are going to be very practical for us in that. You're going to be made aware of a minor prophet book in the Old Testament that you probably otherwise haven't studied before. So in some ways, I think it may be scary to you. You may go, man, I don't know if I really want to study Amos, right? But it's for that reason that we should be studying it. And you will, at the end of that time, be able to say, I've studied verse by verse through a book of the minor prophets. And you'll get a lot out of it. It will be really great. Amos has some references to some different historical events that took place that are actually sort of alluded to in the book of Revelation. And so there's some interesting ties to the New Testament with regard to Amos. I'm really excited to jump into it. I think it's going to be a different type of study than what you're used to. And we're going to find, again, there's a lot of practicality in it. There's a lot of things in there that God says to his people through the prophet Amos that is so necessary. And so you're going to learn a little bit about the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah and what was going on during that time. There's a lot of great history. But enough about that. We're going to jump in. Genesis 47, 13 through 28. This is a shorter lesson today. And really, I think this lesson, when I think about this passage, I think of the importance of legacies, right? Of leaving a legacy, of making a lasting impression on the people around you in such a way that when you're gone, your legacy continues. And that is what we see with Joseph here. Joseph develops what we call an agrarian system for Egypt. And what happens here is we are a couple years into the famine, and the famine is continuing to get worse, not only for the people in Egypt, but the people in Canaan. And so Joseph has 3 deals that he works out with the Egyptian people to carry them through this famine. The first one is outlined here, money for rations. begins in verse 14. He gathers all of the money. All the people go and gather their money in their homes, and they bring it before Joseph. Joseph collects all their money. He divvies out rations of grain to each of the individuals who bring their money. He brings the money to Pharaoh. So now Pharaoh is in control of all the money of all the households in Egypt. And there's some interesting, I think, wordplay here. The word for found, all the money that they could find in their home. It's a Hebrew word that implies they were really like seeking it out. So it kind of imagines them rummaging through drawers and rummaging through old pots and things that they would have kept money in to find every last penny that they could find. Of course, it wasn't a penny, it would have been shekels. So interesting, actually probably not even shekels, it would have been some kind of Egyptian money. But they are scrounging, in other words, for their money. The second thing he does is the people come back and they say, this is the next year, we're going to die if we don't have more food. And so they bring all of their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gives them food in exchange for their livestock. There is an inclusion of horses that is mentioned here in this, which I think is actually pretty fascinating. Horses were very valuable, often associated with war, international trade, and Egyptian aristocracy. And we see evidence of that throughout the other parts of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 16, 1 Kings 10, Isaiah 31. So they were really bringing like everything they had livestock-wise. It wasn't just like the low end of the totem pole. They had all of the wealthy, all of the valuable livestock as well. And in exchange, Joseph is giving them food. Again, last but not least, again, they run out of grain, and he works out a deal where they deed their land back over to Joseph, actually over to Pharaoh, and in exchange for the deed of their land, they're given seed to repopulate their fields. Joseph seems to think that after this famine, seeds are going to grow again, and so he gives them all this seed, and his only stipulation is you only have to give 20% of your grain back to Pharaoh. You get to keep 80% of it. And, this whole system, when we read this, I think from a capitalistic mindset in the West, it's easy to read this and go, man, it seems like Joseph was really taking them to the bank here. Like he's just kind of raking them over the coals. He's getting all their money, all their livestock, all their land. It says they become servants to one another. I mean, this just seems like he's like taking wild advantage of them. But that's not what we should take away from this passage at all. The people's response is that you've saved our lives. Joseph is seen as a hero in this story. They're very grateful for the deals that Joseph has worked out with them. And so he says, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord. We'll be servants to Pharaoh. This is Genesis 47:25. So don't read this as Joseph taking advantage of them. Joseph is working out a deal that is both profitable for Egypt, for Pharaoh, for the economic system there in place in Egypt, but also in such a way where the people still get to keep 80% of the crops. I mean, they still have the land to live on. It's just deeded over to Pharaoh now, and their payment to him is not rent. It's not a monthly bill. They just give 20% of their crops back to Pharaoh. So it pours back in other words, to these storehouses in case there is another famine. So it's a genius system, actually. It's not one that holds the people. The people were just sort of living off the land for free, and this is a system then that sort of creates a centralized government that is able to care for the people as it is doing in the midst of a horrible famine that would have otherwise taken the lives of many, many, many people, if not all the people in Egypt. It was a really bad famine. This story does show, I think, a lot of mercy and grace as well. It is fascinating to me, Pharaoh was not obligated to give any of the grain to the people. He was not obligated to save anyone. They did nothing to earn that. And yet Pharaoh, through Joseph's workings, is seen as merciful because he is working with his people to provide for them in exchange for something, but not nearly anything is worth their life. And so I think it's a fascinating just kind of example of mercy and grace here. Finally, we see the end of Jacob's story, or what alludes to the end of Jacob's story. He lives to be 147 years old. This is verses 27 and 28. So this is picking up where verses 11 and 12 left off. Verses 11 and 12 from last week says, Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt and the best of the land in the land of Ramesses. Remember, we talked about that last week. As Pharaoh had commanded, and Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. Then we have this whole agrarian system that is kind of an interlude. It picks back up in verse 27, and it says, Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. That's kind of a nod to the first commandment that God gives to Adam and Eve, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And it says, And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And so the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And then he breathed his last breath. Now, here's what's about to happen. Next week, we're going to come back, and we know that Jacob dies at 147 years old, but we're going to rewind a little bit before that, and we're going to see the last days of Jacob's life. Because remember, all of this has taken place. They moved to Goshen. He lives another 17 years. There's a lot of life that happened in that 17-year period. And particularly in those last moments, he blesses his children. And we learn a lot about these 12 tribes and what the future for them is going to hold as we move forward into Israelite history. And so next week we will kind of rewind a little bit right before Jacob dies and see those sort of last days play out and what unfolds there. Hope that you enjoy this lesson. It's, I think, a pretty straightforward lesson. The discussion is on leaving a legacy as well, which is, I think, just an important thing for everyone to consider, especially as you get closer to the end of your life. You want to know that you made a difference. And we have the ability to make a difference, especially in the church. You know, God desires us to be mentors, to be disciplers, disciple makers, and you're never too young or old to begin doing that kind of work. And so I challenge you to be transparent in this group, talk about it. Hopefully last week's discussion on grief was also worthwhile to you. And just a word to you that Wednesday, October 7th, our freedom groups begin. And if in the process of talking about, maybe discovering for the first time that you have some undealt with grief, I highly encourage you to get into a freedom group. And even if it's not a grief share group, some kind of group to begin working through and processing through whatever it was that study brought up. Praying for you this week. Hope to see you here in church on Sunday, practicing safe practices, of course. No more registration, and talk with your group leader and find out when is best. You'll have your old room reserved so that when you get back in the swing of things, it's right back to where you guys were. And we'll be ready to kick off the book of Amos here very, very quickly as soon as we wrap up Genesis. We will see you next time. God bless you.